Thank you for joining me. Hello, everyone. This is Psych 92, Developmental Psychology. We are covering Chapter 9, Late Adulthood. So one thing to know is that late adulthood is actually the largest developmental stage in terms of age range. So because of this, think about it, when we become an adult legally, it's by the time we're 18, it's a very long time span. So we have divided it into several stages. So young old is between age 65 to 84. When people are in this age range, yes, they are seniors and many may be retired, but they're still in good health and, usually still very, very engaged socially. And in terms of cognitive functioning, they can still accomplish most tasks that people want to do. Oldest old is between ages of 85 to 99. At this stage, now people are really experiencing a lot of health problems. Bad habits that you engaged in when you were younger now come back to haunt you. So this is where people will have, diabetes, dementia, all sorts of mobility issues. All of this is actually accumulation of bad habits that we had when we were younger. Finally, you have centenarians who are age 100 and above. So a lot of times people are in good health. They may be close to death. And more people are actually reaching this stage. So that's something important to make note of. In terms of aging, why do we age, right? So there are many theories for why it is we age, and we've grouped them into different categories. So one has to do with what we call program theories. So these theories follow the idea that we have a biological timetable and that we are designed to, quote unquote, like expire at a certain time. So programmed longevity suggests that we are genetically inclined to age, and that, as people age, that our cells are built to not continue to regenerate to the same extent. Cellular clock theory says that our cells lose the ability to reproduce. So instead of, like the mitosis idea where it's continually regenerating, reproducing, if our cells are not reproducing at the same rate as they are degenerating, then we are going to decline. So this kind of explains why our immune system starts to decline as well. Then we have the hormonal stress theory. And the idea there is that parts of our body just aren't working as well. And because of those components of our body that aren't working well, we start to have metabolic problems. So here, the idea is that it's our hormones that are determining longevity indicates that it's really just within our cells generally. Cellular clock theory suggests that it's environmental factors or things like that that are happening, that our cells lose this ability to produce. And then the hormonal stress theory has to do with our hormones. So there are different focuses that we have. In terms of cellular clock theory, you'll see if you Google telomeres, right, you'll find that they're parts of our DNA. So if you look at this little diagram here, you'll see that toward the ends, those are the telomeres. And what we notice is that the telomeres start to shorten. So after a period of time of replication, they simply do not regenerate to the same extent. So as cells reproduce, the telomeres get shorter. When telomeres get too short, several things could happen. So it could turn itself off. They call that cellular senescence, right? So it's just like that pre-programmed idea. They could die, and that's known as apoptosis, or especially when people have tried to artificially regenerate telomeres, what happens is that they go out of control and they continue to divide, and then they become abnormal. So like as in cancer, where there's an overgrowth of it. So although telomeres provide a key to the idea of aging, we still don't know how to mitigate or control it. We just know correlation, right? That as people get older, the telomeres start to shorten. And so some scientists are looking into the idea of artificially keeping them regenerated to see if that will be the fountain of youth. Hormonal stress theory. This is something that we often talk about, especially we like to look at presidents. So here's a picture of President Obama when he first started as president, and then at the end of his presidency. So you'll see his hair has gotten really gray. And the idea is that stress causes premature aging, right? The idea is that stress triggers the hormone cortisol, and cortisol does not actually decrease with age. It can increase with age. The more stress we experience, the more cortisol is released, and the more that the hypothalamic damage can occur. So this is the idea of the hormonal stress theory. And obviously, if you're in a position like President of the United States, you're going to experience a lot of stress. And so we like to look at these portraits of presidents because it's really easily noticeable how much they've aged in the time period that they are president. So cortisol is linked to many negative outcomes like diabetes, having thyroid problems, osteoporosis. So in fact, the density of your bones can be affected by the release of cortisol, and hypotension can occur as well. So in terms of damage error theory, so those are the program theories, now damage error theories have more to do with environmental causes. So here the idea is that we damage our DNA the more that we expose our bodies to harmful agents like UV radiation, hydrocarbons, the air pollution, things we breathe. As we age, we are exposing our bodies to all these environmental factors that affect us. And as we damage components of our body, especially our mitochondria, what we're finding is that less energy is being created through the mitochondria, which is what converts our oxygen to our ATP, which provides the energy for the cell. So less energy for our cell, eventually our cells will die. So that's the idea with the idea of mitochondrial damage. There's also the idea that because of pollution, things like hairsprays, aerosols, they release things called free radicals, right? So the free radicals are actually a type of oxygen molecule that is missing an electron. That makes the electron very unstable. And so what happens when electrons are missing is that the cell wants to even it out. It wants to find another electron to make it complete. And it's taking electrons from other cells. So this is, it's kind of like keep borrowing and keep borrowing. And what happens is that eventually you end up with many cells that are damaged because they don't have the stability of having all the electrons they're supposed to have. It's kind of like a snowball effect, right? A takes from B takes from C takes from D. And what happens is you end up with more and more free radicals, and that ends up actually causing your body to behave abnormally and cause premature cell death, cause things like cancer, cataracts. A lot of illnesses are being attributed to this idea of our exposure to free radicals. So those are the main theories in terms of what causes damage and what causes aging. Let's look at physical damage, physical change in late adulthood. So with late adulthood, we are talking about change, but it's not really improvement, right? We have a lot of different components happening. So our heart muscles thicken, our arteries become less flexible, our lung capacity decreases, kidneys are less efficient, our bladder, our control over our bladder decreases. We do have some new neurons being produced. Remember, our memories keep on building, thank goodness. And really the variability that people experience in late adulthood is quite a wide range, and it really depends on our behaviors when we're younger and our continued behaviors as we age. So genetics, lifestyle, and disease all play a role in the types of changes people experience. So in terms of body shape and composition, right, our peak in emerging adulthood, and then it kind of goes downhill from there. What we notice is that our body shape will change. And some of that is actually due to dehydration, right? The amount of water in our body is decreased. So it's really important to keep hydrating as much as possible. Another reason that our bodies change when we're in late adulthood is that our bone density decreases. So that happens naturally. It's called osteopenia in the early stages, and it becomes osteoporosis in late stages. Now, bone density can actually be controlled in a way with resistance training, because if we continue resistance training, that actually helps our bone density and prevents it from deteriorating. So if we are not engaging in any kind of resistance training, then it's going to happen much more quickly. And when our bones are less dense, they are more brittle, and we are suspect to more breakage and damage. So we want to really try to maintain bone density as much as possible. After 30, our body fat will increase. So even if we're the same weight, right, we can maintain the same weight, but what happens is our bones become less dense, so that becomes lighter, but the weight, instead of muscle and bone density, is being replaced by fat, by body fat. So that's why you might see somebody who is in late adulthood who has not changed weight at all, but then their body composition looks different. And it's because the body fat percentage has increased. You'll notice that as people get older, the fat tissue builds up towards the center of the body. So just the distribution of weight and fat also changes, and that's another marker of late adulthood. So wouldn't we like to look like this in late adulthood, right? Muscles. Loss of muscle tissue is a natural progression, natural part of aging. Again, it can be prevented, and a lot of it has to do with exercise and activities that we engage in. If you're physically active, you're going to lose less muscle. So what causes the sarcopenia? Well, first of all, our nerve cells actually decrease, and so we aren't even aware of when we should be moving as much. A lot of times people in late adulthood they're not energetic, and so they don't want to move as much. When we do eat protein, and that's another part, is that people in late adulthood don't tend to have enough protein. It's harder for their bodies to turn that protein into energy. And what you'll also notice is many people in late adulthood, they just don't want to eat as much, right? They have reduced appetite. And so even that component makes it harder for them to have the energy. So it's really important to encourage people in late adulthood to, first of all, have enough calories, and to make sure that the calories they're having, a good component of that should be protein, because that will really help them. Also make sure they're hydrating well. So the problem that people encounter when their muscles, when they're not as strong anymore, is that they can fall, right? So they're weak, they lose stamina, they start to have mobility issues. If they fall, there is a really unfortunate statistic that after a major fall, within 6 months, somebody in late adulthood is very likely to pass away. And so in order to prevent that, you want to make sure you keep up exercise for a number of reasons. Physical activity is super important, even in late adulthood. So here's a typical progression. You can see 45, she's standing upright. Age 65, her back starts to curve. And then by 85, you see the back curving a lot. So it is true that we tend to get shorter as we get older, right? So that height loss is related to changes in bones, and also just, the spine will compress as well. So typically, as people get older, they lose almost a ½ inch every 10 years after the age of 40. And overall lose about 1 to 3 inches, depending on, how old they get. Some of that is going to be because of just spine compression. Others is because of changes in the spine, as you can see in the diagram there. So even though we're losing height, people are gaining weight. Again, muscle weighs more than fat. And so the body fat percentage increases, muscle density decreases, and you're going to see a change in body composition. So men usually gain weight until about age 55 and then start to lose the weight. That's usually because of loss of muscle. And women gain weight until about age 65. As I mentioned, it's because fat replaces lean muscle. So fat weighs less than muscle. So we want to make sure that our people in late adulthood get enough protein and try to keep up the exercise to maintain the muscle mass and also the bone density. Some sensory changes, vision, that is one that also noticeably gets worse as people enter late adulthood. There are several main types of eye changes that you should be aware of. So cataracts occur when the lens of the eye seems to be cloudy, so everything looks very cloudy and blurry. Macular degeneration has to do with your retina. So the center of the retina actually deteriorates, and it seems as if like there's a hole in what you're looking at. It's quite alarming. And then glaucoma is another major eye illness that happens in late adulthood, where there is a buildup of fluid and it actually can damage the optic nerve. So there's pressure that's happening in the eye, and it starts off by losing peripheral vision. So your ability to see things happening on the peripheries, the range starts to decrease. So one of the tests for glaucoma is you should have a baseline test when you're younger, so that they have an idea of the field of vision. And then every few years, they will test you again. And if your field of vision starts to decrease, then that's, that alerts the doctors that you need to take medication. It's usually just some eye drops actually that reduces the pressure. So the cure for it is actually really easy if you catch it early. Any questions about some of these changes? All right, so here's a nice, this kind of illustrates these three changes, difficulties. So normal vision, you see these two children playing with balls. If you have cataracts, it looks blurry. So that's what someone, and the more the cataracts you have, the blurrier it will be, to the point where you cannot see or distinguish anything. Macular degeneration, as I mentioned, that has to do with your retina. So as you can see in this picture, it's kind of alarming, right? It's almost like there's a hole in what you're seeing. So this person would not even see the children's faces because of the macular degeneration. And glaucoma, you can see that the field of vision has shrunk to the point where only the faces are seen and the other components of the picture are not visible. So that gives you a sense of the different types of vision changes as people get older. Other changes in terms of hearing, right? About 25% of adults age 65 to 74 start to have hearing loss. Again, this depends on your habits when you were younger. If you're blasting music or going to concerts a lot when you're younger, the hearing change is going to be more noticeable. So presbycusis is that gradual loss of hearing in late adulthood. What happens is that the range that you can hear really decreases. So you might not be able to hear really high-pitched sounds, and low-pitched sounds might, blur in with other sounds. So those are the kind of things that are happening. Tinnitus, we've all sort of experienced, I'm sure, kind of a ringing in the ears. Sometimes it might even sound like a roaring sound, like a loud wave. And the other component that affects hearing is, or that is affected by our ears, is our balance. So inner ear infections can cause problems with balance. And as we get older, the ossicles in your ears, right, they're almost like little fibers in your ears. They start to stiffen. And when that happens, our balance can be affected. So that's another component that we need to be careful of, because if our balance is affected, then we're more likely to fall. And that could, again, be very problematic for older adults. Taste and smell also is affected as we get older. So starting in the 50s, we might start to lose the taste that we used to be able to detect when we were younger. Now, there is a wide range of taste buds among individuals. There are some people who are known as super tasters, where they take one bite of something and they can right away tell what ingredients there are. And others, like me, can't tell that much. But we start to lose it regardless of where our base point is. We start to lose that sensitivity as we get older. When we lose that, that's connected to our smell, right? So the presbyosmia is loss of smell as we get older, and that affects our taste. Sort of like when you have a cold and you can't tell the way things taste as much, same idea. So our receptor neurons in our noses actually decrease, and that's the reason why we start to lose a sense of smell, and that affects our taste as well. So although the loss of smell and taste might not be alarming, the concern is that it could be an indicative of other neurological problems. Also, so you'll see a lot of older people, they'll want to like pour salt and pepper because their taste has decreased, and that's why they're more likely to add all sorts of seasonings in an attempt to make the food more appealing to them. All right, so bones, I mentioned osteoporosis. That's when your bones become really fragile, breaks easily. Again, we want to avoid fractures, right? Because that can really end up killing people, right? Within 6 months of a major fall, a lot of times we lose our people in late adulthood. Kyphosis is that feature when people their backs start to curve, right? So the spine starts to weaken and their back starts to curve, and that makes it really hard to sit or even to walk. So what are things we can do? Well, we can supplement people's diets with calcium and vitamin D. Try to keep them exercising. The more people exercise and stay mobile, the better off they are, even as they age. Limit things like alcohol. Don't, discourage smoking, those kind of things. But a really key component really is activity and exercise. That's going to be so helpful as people get older. In terms of brain functioning, part of the loss of weight that people experience when they get older is actually loss in the brain. So 5 to 10% of your brain is decreased as you get older. So when between ages 20 and 90, your brain loses 5 to 10% of the weight, right? Why is that? Because neurons shrink, they die. We are synapses, remember synaptic pruning? We lose many synapses. Those are our memories going away. And the axons are actually shorter. So all of these are actually physical changes in the structure of our brain that causes this reduced weight in our brain. And it does impact the way we're thinking. Of course, how can it not affect us? Other brain changes, right? We are not as good at retrieval in our memory. We still have synaptic pruning, plasticity is reduced, and so are the receptors for our neurotransmitters. We start to lose white matter connections, right? So our neurons aren't working as efficiently, and you'll see that as people get older, it's harder for them to recall things, harder for them to process new ideas. When we have synapses, loss of synapses in our hippocampus, those are our memories, right? The hippocampus is the main part of where our memories are stored. And so if we start to lose synapses in that, those are our memories going away. And so really important memories are going to stay, but you also want to help by having older people recall certain events or practice them with pictures, things like that. Just any kind of exercise that way is really going to help them. Larger regions of the brain are activated during complex tasks. So we'll learn about theories about the way that people think and how older people try to compensate for this change in brain functioning in later life. Any questions for physical changes? All right. So there is a theory, of course, of why things are changing. So remember the idea in terms of evolutionary theory is that our bodies, we are designed to try to survive, right? So the scaffolding theory of aging cognition is that in an attempt to compensate for this loss of neurons, for this loss of synapses, is that our brain is trying to build alternative connections. So that's the scaffolding component. There is, to some extent, our brain can compensate for the age-related changes, but actually that is more engaged by social interaction. So you'll see a lot of brain training programs. People are using things on the computer, but the most powerful deterrent for decrease in brain functioning is actually social interaction. Maybe playing board games or something where people are interacting with others. And it should not be games where it's time dependent, where there's a timer, because that's really going to be frustrating for older people. But board games where you are trying to activate different parts of the brain is really important. And of course, if you're playing these games with older people, try to make sure that the rules are fairly simple and that it won't be frustrating for them. But more important than anything else is social interaction. Talk to them. Have them recall things about their lives. Tell them about your life, right? Try to introduce new ideas. All of these things are really helpful. Even starting a new language. Or for somebody who is not already good at the internet, introducing them to using the internet can actually help their brain functioning. So all of these are really important. Let's talk about cognitive changes. Okay, so memory. When we're in late adulthood, we're going to see a lot of changes in terms of memory. And I'm sure you've noticed this yourself. So in terms of working memory, this is the most negatively affected, right? It's hard for people to recall really simple things. They're not very good at even simple cognitive strategies. Just kind of the memorization component, they could get really frustrated with that. So a lot of this has to do with patience. Don't try to have them learn 2 new tasks at the same time. That's going to be very frustrating and difficult for them. So working memory is notably decreased in late adulthood. In terms of long-term memory, it's interesting. So episodic memories, right? Meaning memories that are tied to certain dates actually show a lot more decline than semantic memories. So semantic memories are the memories of facts. So people might remember certain facts, like, when was the Declaration of Independence and things like that. But episodic memory is a little more challenging for people. So it's a good idea to practice people in late adulthood. Just like, oh, when was your anniversary? When was the birthday? Just practicing them over and over again, understanding that that long-term memory component is going to decline, right? It will still help. Better than, just giving up completely. What we do find, interestingly, is that given no time pressure, older adults can actually outperform younger adults with semantic tasks. What they do experience more often as people get older is what we call the tip of the tongue events, where they know that there's a term for it, but it's just hard for them to retrieve that term again. And the time pressure makes it even worse. So if you want to help people, try to recover or try to maintain their long-term memory, practice them in retrieving those facts and everything, but make sure that there's no time pressure and just be very, very patient, right? Procedural memory, so tasks that they learned, doesn't really decline with age. So carpenters will still know how to do things in late adulthood. People who are chefs, those kind of tasks that are more muscle memory rather than, memory that we have to process, they tend to remain longer than anything else. Prospective memory is remembering that we have to do something in the future. That's what it's called, prospective memory. 2 types of prospective memory. There's time-based, like on Wednesday, I have a doctor's appointment, right? And then there is event-based. It's like, okay, when I get home, I need to call the doctor. That's what we call like event-based. So what we see is that as people get older, it's harder for them to remember time-based perspective memories than event-based perspective memories. So in other words, it's harder for people to remember that, on Wednesday, I'm gonna go see the doctor, rather than when I get home, I'm going to call the doctor, right? So that's what event-based is. When an event occurs, you have to do something. Time-based has to do with a specific date or time. And it could be that as people get older, they're just not as concerned about what day of the week it is, especially if they're retired and it's kind of one day melds into another. That could partially explain why time-based is more difficult for them in terms of perspective memory. Okay, recall versus recognition. So recall is when you can see something and remember that it's there, right? So, recall is like just pulling it from your memory. So recall would be maybe like short answer, where you don't have much of a clue, right? You just have to recall it. Recognition is seeing a fact or a picture or something and then remembering it. So recognition is much easier for everybody, actually. So that older adults don't really lose that ability, the recognition task. It's recall memory that really declines, and that's why you have more of those tip of the tongue episodes that happen when you get older. So what are some advantages that we have? So the age advantage is that people can use their knowledge and experience to compensate for these declines, right? If they maintain their activity, they're actually more efficient, right? So keep up practicing, your older adults. And also because of experience, there is something to be said for wisdom, right? Better decision making when people are older. So attention, we do know that it's harder for older adults to maintain their attention. Part of that could be hearing. We do notice that it's harder for them to process information. So it takes longer for them to process information. That's okay. It's difficult for them to remember that kind of the attention, selective attention. If there's a lot of distractions, it's very hard for them to focus and ignore the other things that are distracting. And multitasking is also very difficult for them. So just one task at a time, without many distractions, they'll be fine. So if you're going to have them, put together a puzzle or something, just make sure it's quiet, that there aren't too many, there's not too much noise around there. Conversations as well. It's better for them in a quiet area than in a loud restaurant, for example. In a loud restaurant, they may not be able to understand what they're saying, what you're saying to them. So all of these little details are important to keep in mind to try to keep the older adult engaged and keep them, socially active. In terms of problem solving, not surprisingly, older adults tend to have more strategies, so they can use those strategies more effectively than young adults to solve social and emotional problems. And a lot of times, not the very old, but older adults can also, be more efficient and kind of compensate for that cognitive decline. What we find is that, as it says here, when you have a task that requires processing non-meaningful information, they don't do well with it. It's like, it makes sense, right? You want to pay attention to information that is relevant to you. So maybe they won't do so well with things like Trivial Pursuit, which is non-meaningful information. So if you are going to try to engage them, keep it relevant. Make it something about maybe their previous employment or people in their family, things that are meaningful to them. They will do much better with that. So why do we see all of these cognitive differences? Well, there are a number of theories. So processing speed theory is just that our nervous system is actually slowing down as we get older. And so it's literally more difficult for them to process the information. As I mentioned before, when speed is not a factor, processing is actually fairly good, similar to young adults. So in processing speed theory, it's the nervous system slowing down generally that causes the decline. For inhibition theory, this is saying that it's because older adults cannot suppress the irrelevant information that it makes their processing slower, right? So if you think about it, you have all these, bits of information coming at you, and you know that a lot of it is not important. And when you're younger, you're able to kind of, cut through all of the unimportant stuff. But older people, it's harder for them to discern what's important and not important. And so it causes a slowdown in processing. There's a task called directed forgetting, where you ask people to ignore certain information or to forget it. Actually, most of us are pretty bad. That's where we talk about, oh, I cannot unsee that or unknow that, because being told to forget something is actually often works the opposite for everybody. But for older adults, it's even more difficult for them to complete directed forgetting tasks. I kind of touched on this in terms of wisdom when people get older. Something to know, not everybody who's older is wise, and not everybody who's wise is older, right? There's a difference. So when we talk about intelligence, that's a certain aspect. Those have certain dimensions that we're looking at. We're looking at information processing. We're looking at how quickly people can comprehend a problem or solve a problem, right? Similar to fluid intelligence. That's the mechanics of intelligence. Then you have the pragmatics of intelligence. This is like crystallized intelligence. So this is learning facts, procedures, maybe cultural relevancy. And what we found is that as people get older, they maintain the pragmatics of intelligence, which is like crystallized intelligence, the facts, the experience, all of those components that they've built up over the years. But the decline happens with the mechanics. So the actual, what you do with the information might be harder for older people. When we talk about wisdom, what we're talking about is being able to use the knowledge that you've built up over the years to make good judgments, to make good decisions. So if you've had a lot of experience, exposure to many things, but you're still making bad judgments, then you're not very wise, right? We reserve the word wisdom for people who are able to use previous experiences to judge things well. And so wisdom is not actually dependent on how old somebody is. It's actually more about how somebody uses experiences they've already had, how they use that well in life. So you can have a young person who goes through a bad experience and then moving forward, shares that with others and also makes sure that they never make those mistakes again. We would say that person is wise, right? So wisdom has more to do with how you are using the experiences and knowledge you have to make sure that you don't make the same mistakes again, make good decisions, and also practice good judgment. So wisdom in and of itself, we often associate it with older people, but it is not actually tied to somebody's age. It's more about how they're using the experiences they've gone through. All right, so neurocognitive disorders. We still use the term dementia, but that's really what we're referring to. So a major neurocognitive disorder goes beyond just being forgetful. With a major neurocognitive disorder, people notice a very significant decline, and we'll talk about different areas of functioning. And we call someone having major neurocognitive disorder if they cannot, because of it, they can't function independently. So there are certain things we call ADLs, activities of daily living. And the idea there is that the disorder is so extreme that they can't do things like feed themselves or bathe or dress themselves, where it's just, it has impaired them to an extent. Minor neurocognitive disorder is just, kind of smaller declines. Maybe they're forgetful, they can't remember when their appointments are, things like that. but they can still live and function independently. So that's the big difference. So major neurocognitive disorder, they are no longer able to perform all the functions of daily living. Minor neurocognitive disorder, it hampers them, but they can still live independently. Alzheimer's is the most common type, sadly, and we've heard that it's not an if you get Alzheimer's, it's a when. So in 2016, over 5 million Americans were diagnosed with Alzheimer's. With the baby boomers aging, it's only going to increase. And it's about like the 5th leading cause of death for those age 65 and older. So in terms of the timeline, what you notice in early stages is early brain changes, and stage 2, you really see that they're not able to process as well. There's a subtle decline in thinking. Age 3, when we talk about memory changes, we're talking about them starting to forget who are members of their family. Those are really significant memory changes. And because they no longer recognize people who they were close to, they can be very confused. And that's a really frightening stage to be in. My mother-in-law had Alzheimer's, and it was heartbreaking because she saw a picture. I showed her a picture of her with her family at a major event, and she started to cry because she didn't recognize anybody in the picture. She knew that they were members of her family, but she had no idea who they were, and it just completely broke her heart. And so that's the really tragic part of Alzheimer's, when you become aware of the loss that you're experiencing, and it's really tragic. By stage 4, now we're talking about much later stages, inability to bathe, dress, or eat without help. So bathing, dressing, and eating without help, those are activities of daily living. So by stage 4, they need somebody to come and assist them. They might even forget how to eat, right? And then by stage 5, a loss of ability to communicate and recognize loved ones. So not being able to recognize loved ones can happen much earlier. And then by stage 5, they don't even know how to talk anymore. And it's a very sad progression. It doesn't seem like it's painful in the sense of like where they have to take painkillers. It's painful emotionally, because it's almost like people can determine that they're declining, and that's the part that's painful for them. And it's also very painful for family members to have to see the change in the people. All right, so hopefully before all of these things happen, people retire, right? So they have time to enjoy their lives before all of these declines happen. So although the average retirement age is 65, actually people continue working well beyond that. So about 18.5% of adults over age 65 continue to work. And quite a few people transition to what we call bridge jobs. So that is sort of little jobs that you take. You retire from your main job, and then you take on like little tasks. Could be to supplement income or just to keep yourself engaged, right? So about 15% of workers get another job after full retirement. When they do that, we call that an encore career. So let's say you were a programmer for one of the high-tech companies, and then you retire. A great encore career would actually be teaching, right? Because you can convey a lot of what you've learned to younger people. So teaching is a wonderful encore career. It's a different field, but it still keeps you engaged, social. I think it's a fantastic idea for people. Why do people wait until 65 to retire? Well, first of all, there are many benefits that do not kick in until you are 65. So here in the United States, Medicare is one of them. Social Security, collecting Social Security benefits is another component that you need to wait. What we found is this country no longer has mandatory requirement for all jobs, right? So being a pilot, there used to be mandatory retirement age. Because we have a shortage of pilots, they've actually raised that. So some of the mandatory retirement ages make sense depending on the type of job that we're talking about. So why would some people, what what causes the variation in retirement age? Usually it's financial. That's the first one, because you don't want to live too long, meaning that you run out of money and then you don't want to be destitute, in your later stages. And also psychologically, people feel older when they've retired. And if you don't do it well, it could actually age you more quickly and you'll decline more quickly in terms of retirement. So there are different stages to retiring. There's actually retirement stages. So stage one, remote pre-retirement stage, you're just thinking about it. It's like maybe you're in your late 50s and you're just, I wonder, I'm starting to feel stressed out by my work. Maybe I don't want to continue doing this. So that's kind of the idea, thinking about retirement. Immediate pre-retirement phase is when you decide, okay, within the next 2 years, I'm going to retire. This is how I'm going to progress in my career and make sure that everybody is, in good shape before I retire. So when you start making those kind of plans, that's the immediate pre-retirement phase. Actual retirement, right? So you've thought about it, you made your plans, 2 years has happened, you've given your notice, you're retired. After you retire, there's something called the honeymoon phase, where it's this is where you do all the things you've been wanting to do. You maybe play golf, maybe build something that you've been wanting to, put together, take care of pictures, some little projects. So that's kind of the honeymoon phase where you're just enjoying the extra time that you never had before. But that doesn't last forever. So the disenchantment phase is when you've done all the things, maybe could be years, could be months, but now you kind of feel an emotional letdown. A lot of times it comes from boredom, or maybe, you're retired and your friends and family are not retired. And so you find yourself alone, that kind of idea. So then you have the reorientation phase. So now you've had time to go through, your projects. You realize that not everybody's retired, and so they don't have the time. So you start to simplify your plans and you have a routine. Okay, wake up at 8 o'clock, I'll go for a walk, meet some friends, do some projects. And as long as you have this structure, that's really important. So in the concrete plan component, part of the planning that people do in retiring is what are they going to do with their free time? Because if there is nothing, so volunteerism is really important, and we'll talk about that with post-retirement activities. It's important to have a plan of what to do in that free time. So here we have post-retirement activities, right? It's really important to stay socially engaged. That's good for your brain. And what we have is like one of the purposes of community college is lifelong learning. And so we have a strong retirement community around Evergreen Valley College, and we have a lot of seniors taking classes. So sometimes people will come back to school for an encore career or take classes that they just enjoy, a lot of art and music classes, and they even have educational travel programs. So all of these things really help people transition to retirement very successfully. It is very important to have a plan. So ageism, any ism is so unfortunate, and it is part of what we deal with in the society. So ageism is when people experience prejudice based on age. If you believe in the stereotypes of the elderly, where you might say, oh, like the doddery old man, can't remember anything, can't do anything, completely, inept. It could be a self-fulfilling prophecy, just like other stereotype threats that we experience. If you believe in these stereotypes, you could actually end up fulfilling it unintentionally. So why is this important when people get older? Well, if people say, oh, I'm just getting older, they might not seek treatment for physical problems, right? They might just say, oh, it's just because I'm older. Or you might even have a doctor who is ageist and not really looking into it. It's really important to advocate and be conscientious about any physical problems you're starting to encounter, or somebody who's older and if they're starting to encounter it, please encourage them to seek medical attention and make sure that their physician is actually paying attention and not dismissing them because of their age. If they are dismissing them because of their age, that is ageism, and you should seek an alternative physician who'll be more respectful, because it is extremely disrespectful to have someone just say, oh, you're going through this just because you're older, right? That's not acceptable. So what we notice is that non-white elders kind of have that double whammy of ageism and racism. And then we have triple jeopardy, where females of color actually experience all three: ageism, racism, and sexism. So it's an unfortunate, it's something that we deal with in this society, especially, here in North America. It's a very youth-oriented society. And so there's a value placed more on being youthful, and sort of the older people are dismissed and not really respected, which is really, really sad. Okay, socio-emotional state change in late adulthood. So in Erikson's psychosocial stages, we are at the last stage, stage 8, ego integrity versus despair. So integrity has to do with kind of wisdom, right? Looking back on your life, thinking about all the experiences you've gone through, and making good decisions, and sharing these strategies and good decisions with younger people. So if you have ego integrity, you're looking back at your life with satisfaction, right? If you have, you have a family you love, you had a career that you really worked well on, all these components make you look back on your life with happiness. On the other hand, if you have despair, then you're fixating on the awful things of your life. So if you have despair, you're going to experience bitterness and resentment. Like, oh, if that person never got the promotion instead of me, I would have been much happier, that kind of thing. So you want to try to make sure that people in late adulthood are looking back and reflecting on their lives more with positivity than with anger and resentment. So activity theory, I've been mentioning this throughout, right? Staying active is very important. The more active people are physically, the better their physical and mental health, right? So group classes are fantastic for older people. It, keeps them connected with others, gives them a sense of purpose. Volunteerism is still really helpful and possible for our late adults. When you have these goals, though, you want to make sure that you're realistic. So things like Tai Chi are really good. Low impact exercise, that's what you want to encourage. You don't want someone doing aerobics when they're in late adulthood. So everything should be tempered with realism and with the idea of safety as well. So generativity, remember, that's the idea of really giving back to the younger generations. So volunteerism is so good for our friends in late adulthood. African American adults have the highest volunteer rate. Being active in church is really, really great for older adults as well. Keeps them socially engaged and also intellectually engaged. Other activities that older adults participate in, helping to raise their grandchildren, right? As people get older, though, it can become more challenging. So sometimes at a certain point, maybe they can't help as much, and it's more about the younger generation interacting with them, right? So you just want to be mindful of how much engagement and the type of engagement that our older adults are in with their grandchildren. So there is a convoy model of social relations, 2 theories about social networks in late adulthood. So one is that when we make connections and are older, there's sort of an exchange of social support. So relationships with our family and friends should be stable, but what happens is as people get older, they tend to just focus on these stable relationships of the family and close friends. Peripheral relationships with coworkers and neighbors, they don't really focus on that as much, right? It's less stable. Socio-emotional selectivity theory, that is like really talking about why people stay connected as they get older. And it kind of actually works hand in hand with this convoy model of social relations. So as people get older, They really want to focus on people who they interact with, who make them feel good, right? It's about positive affect. So even if they've had a friend they've known for many, many years, if the person's always negative, they might not choose to spend as much time with them, right? It's not about getting information. It's really about how does the interaction with the person make you feel? So they prioritize time. They know, older adults know that their time is limited. And so they prioritize what time they have left with those who they are emotionally close to. Social networks are much smaller, but they're much higher in quality. Loneliness versus solitude. What is the difference? Well, when you are lonely, you are by yourself, but you want to be with others. So loneliness is that discrepancy between the social contact somebody has and the contact somebody wants. So a lot of times women are lonely, they outlive men, and we'll talk about, I have to bring that up, the slides that show the difference in terms of life expectancy. So for men, it's usually emotional isolation. Men tend to have more difficulty sharing themselves emotionally with others than women do. And when people have loneliness, it is associated with lack of self-worth, lack of self-esteem, desperation, and depression. So we want to prevent that for our later adults. Solitude, on the other hand, is when you're alone and you want to be alone. You actually enjoy it. So with solitude, you gain self-awareness. Maybe there's a lot of self-reflection happening. You're able to take care of yourself. You're comfortable being by yourself, and you're pursuing interests. Maybe, you like to collect stamps or play card games by yourself. So in solitude, you want to be alone. You're alone and you want to be alone. You enjoy your own company. With loneliness, you are alone, but you actually want to be with other people. So dating does happen in late adulthood. And what we find is that men still, they're looking for physical attractiveness. A lot of times, older men will be marrying younger women. Older men are also, after the death of their spouse, are more interested in repartnering than women do. So until about age of 75, women want older men. And then after that, it's like, no, thank you, right? They don't want to be caregivers. They don't want to take care of somebody else. And they don't want to experience being a widow again. So they would rather be alone or maintain friendships than actually getting remarried. And a lot of times, marriage is a legal agreement. And so older adults might not want to get married because it could affect the inheritance of their relatives, and so they might not want to do that. What's interesting and might be kind of an ill factor for people is that nursing homes have a very high rate of STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, right? So getting older does not eliminate the possibility of getting an STD. So about 25% of people living with HIV and AIDS are over the age of 50, right? So only 1 in 4 single adults over the age of 50 actually used a condom the last time they had sex because they're not thinking about pregnancy. Okay, you're not thinking about pregnancy, but you should be thinking about STDs, right? So that's something really important, that we educate our older adults about the need to use protection. Not because you're worried about pregnancy, but because you want to limit the transmission of sexually transmitted diseases. LGBTQ elders, we have about 3 million in the United States who identify as lesbian or gay. Unfortunately, they're more likely to have physical health problems. They might have substance and mental health problems as well. There's still, unfortunately, a stigma about being part of LGBTQ, so they might not have as much social support from their families. What they do have is what we call fictive kinship, where they create their own families through their friendships. Again, unfortunately, people of color experience kind of that double jeopardy discrimination because of their sexual orientation and because of their minority status. And so a lot of times LGBTQ elders really have to rely on their friends if their families, don't agree with their lifestyle. This is really sad in terms of activities. Elder abuse is something that happened. It is real. About 10%, 4.3 million elders actually experience elder abuse. Those who are aged 60 to 69 are more susceptible. The sad part is the most likely abusers are their own children and spouses who are financially dependent on them. Right? So financial abuse is a type of elder abuse. That's when people are taking their financial resources and using it for their own benefit and not for the benefit of the elderly. So it's about $3 billion industry each year. And it happens across ethnic and racial groups. What are some risk factors? If the elderly person has some cognitive impairment, has some dementia, then they are really easy picking for people, right? So someone needs to advocate for the elderly to make sure that doesn't happen. If their health declines and they're dependent on others, again, that makes them more vulnerable. If they have a disability, if they are female, right? Females tend to outlive their male counterparts. And so once they are alone, that increases the chances of being abused as an elder. And also adult children who depend on their parents for financial housing support, you would think that they have a vested interest in taking care of the elderly, but it's not true. Those who are dependent are more likely to actually abuse their elders than others. It's a really sad but real fact that happens. All right, successful aging. Successful aging is when you continue through life and you don't have issues with mobility. You avoid most diseases, you're not on a lot of medication. Many of the risk factors in terms of cognitive impairment, you've been able to mitigate, right? So maintenance of high physical and cognitive functioning, you're engaged socially and in productive activities. All of these components really help people go through what we call successful aging. So what would we know? Well, if the elderly make adjustments to continue living as independently as possible, they have better outcomes. So even if that means having somebody come in to help them with some minor tasks, maybe cleaning, things like that, as long as if they can stay independent for as long as possible, it's really, really good for them. And it's also, be realistic. You might have to compensate for ways to choose, to achieve certain goals. That's okay. That's really part of successful aging isn't denying that you're older. It's understanding that you're getting older and trying to continue your life in the highest quality way possible. That does include exercising, being social, and having a diet that has high protein and not so much processed meats. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Any questions in what I have discussed? Any questions? I want to show you some of the life expectancy components that I pulled together. Oh, here it is. Okay. Why this didn't show up. I will share this. Sorry, I'm not sure. I'm not sure why this part didn't show. Oh, apologies. Here it is. Okay. So in terms of getting older, these are some current statistics. 65 years old and above is the fastest growing segment of the US population. We have about 1/7 that's 65 and above, and with the baby boomers getting older, it's going very quickly. By 2019, we'll have 54.1 million people who are considered seniors. Current 65-year-old can expect to live about 19 years, but I do want to show you that we've made it a turning point where our life expectancy has actually declined for the first time ever. So here, this is a projection of where we are in terms of population. So on the left table is the percent of US population. On the right table, that is generally in other main countries, America, Japan, Germany, Italy, Canada, and Russia. So by 2030, 1 in 5 of our adults are going to be over the age of 65. That's not that far from now. We're in 2024. So in 6 years, we're expecting 1 in 5 adults to be over the age of 65. And that's really going to impact our economy. If you look at the right table, in terms of percentage of population, you can see that Japan, by 2030, has 32.2% of their population will be over 65. So we're trailing Japan by about 10 years. That's what the idea is. If we do not, our younger people are not really having kids as much, they want to focus more on their careers. If you don't encourage immigration, I know it's a really hot topic, we are going to be in a situation very similar to Japan where we're not going to have enough people replace those who are retiring, especially as the baby boomers, age and retire. We're going to have a problem with filling those jobs. This is something new that I, just got data for in terms of life expectancy. So life expectancy, remember, is the average number of years that members of a population live. So in 2015, our worldwide life expectancy was 71.4. In 2012, the US life expectancy was 79.7, but it went down in 2021. It dropped by over 3 years, which is the first time ever that has happened. So it went down to 76.4, with females 79.3 and males 73.5. So this idea that children's lives may be shorter than parents, it's a reality. Our life expectancy is now shorter than it was, 10 years ago. What's causing that? A lot of it could be climate change. It's processed food. It's our lifestyle. There are so many factors that are affecting our life expectancy now. So even with the technology and everything, we're having a problem and we need to deal with it. So the difference between lifespan and life expectancy, right? Life expectancy is the average. So life expectancy will always be shorter than lifespan. Lifespan is the greatest age that somebody of a species reaches. So for humans, it's about 120 to 125 years old. So the average, the life expectancy is 76.4, but the lifespan is 120 to 125. Any questions about the difference there? Okay, so this is new data as well, 2021 US life expectancy by sex. As you can see, women still consistently have a longer life expectancy than males. So why is that? A number of reasons. Women have better genetic developmental stability because the X chromosome, right? Men only have one X chromosome, women have two X chromosomes. If you recall, when we talked about prenatal development, the X chromosomes are much larger than the Y chromosomes. And so they are less susceptible to certain diseases because of that. Women tend to have better immune functioning. They have lower rates of mental illness. They do find that estrogen has a protective factor on the circulatory system, and generally, women tend to have better health behaviors than men. So this is overall on average. Also, this is just, kind of the life expectancy. Oh, sorry, this is not right here. Distribution of population by race or ethnicity. So we have white in the first column, Black in the second column, Hispanic. Remember, Hispanic is not a race, it's an ethnicity. Asian, AI is Alaskan Indian or Native American, and then NHOPI has to do with the Pacific Islanders. So you can see in terms of the youth, we have more Hispanic youth than anything else, right? In terms of 65 years and above, more of our white colleagues are over the age of 65, and it varies in other ages. But it's a really interesting table that tells us the age distribution by race and ethnicity. So looking at the youth, that's our future, right? More Hispanic than any other ethnic or racial group. We also have the American Indian up there, and then the Black youth are also fairly high numbers in terms of 0 to 18 years age. All right, so I just wanted to share that component with you as well. Thank you all for joining me. Are there any questions before we end the session? Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.